Chromaticism assumes a diatonic foundation. What I mean by that is that chromatics are ancillary tones. They're placed between and are less important than the structural pitches of the diatonic modes. It is possible, however, to add another level to the bottom of our hierarchy where all 12 pitches are equally important. At that level dwells atonality. Atonal music, on the other hand, does often use all 12 chromatic pitches as equally important notes, and because of this, it has its own unique sound. The term atonality suggests not only a negation of tonality, but also a negation of mode. Playing a simple chromatic scale can demonstrate this idea. Each note of the scale is separated by a half step. They're all alike, none has a unique character. Composing atonal music isn't easy. In order to create atonal music, the composer must consciously avoid the kinds of musical patterns that define tonality. This is very difficult because the very binding coherence of music is based on just these kinds of structures. As Rudolf Reddy pointed out, atonality as such is no binding nor form-building musical force, but rather the lack, the negation of such forces. Theodor Adorno, philosopher and student of Alban Berg, agreed. He believed the prohibition of such tonic-defining structures as diminished seventh chords and chromatic modulatory tones might cause a vague discomfort to the musically trained ear, and that this, quote, vague discomfort is transformed into a prohibitive canon. This canon today excludes even the medium of tonality. He wrote that the sound of atonal music was created by the avoidance of the, quote, drive-like character of the leading tone, and that the use of all 12 pitches reinforced, quote, what is instinctive in every conscientious composer, sensitivity toward the too early recurrence of the same pitch. The development of atonality in the early 20th century was viewed by its practitioners as evolutionary, not revolutionary. They viewed it simply as an outgrowth of late 19th century German Romantic music. In order to demonstrate this, I'll take a theme by Gustav Mahler from his Second Symphony and make it atonal. I'll make it atonal by getting rid of arpeggiated triads, leading tones, and scales. The original version is on the top of the scrolling score. I'll play that first, and then I'll play the altered atonal version. There are a few things about the atonal version that don't sound very atonal to me. All of these things have to do with rhythms that are too regular. I've done a new atonal version, making a few of the rhythms a little bit less regular. This new version is now on the bottom of the scrolling score. That's better. It has the emotional quality that's associated with late Romantic music, but a certain vagueness that's associated with atonality. It's pretty hard work evading all of these tonal patterns that we grew up hearing, and that we spent years learning in music school. Arnold Schoenberg came up with a technique to make this easier, to make it easier for him to organize his atonal ideas. He called this the 12-tone technique. We'll talk about the 12-tone technique in a later video. For now, let's just look at its melodic component. Schoenberg's technique was based upon the 12-tone row, an ordering of the 12 chromatic pitches. The composer first chose this ordering, and then the entire piece was based upon it. If this ordering negated tonality, the piece would be atonal. If not, then tonal elements would sneak in. As Rudolf Reddy wrote, the 12-tone technique as such does not exclude tonality entirely. Still, the technique facilitates the attempt to exclude tonality if one so wishes. When I was growing up in the 1960s and 70s, 12-tone music was ubiquitous. Most of my teachers believed that 12-tone music was the only kind of music that would exist in the future. Still, many 12-tone composers never quite bought into the idea of complete atonality. This was true of music by Copland and Bernstein and even Stravinsky. Young composers of my generation would often include tonal elements in their 12-tone pieces. There was a kind of cheating that went on. We would first compose a diatonic melody and use the notes that were left over at the end of the row. We would include that melody in our finished composition and play those extra notes very quickly, practically all at once, at the end of the melody, just to get them out of the way. That was an example from one of my student pieces. Not exactly in the atonal spirit. My students often complain that atonal music sounds random. This makes sense, because randomly distributed data points like musical pitches should be scattered in such a way that no patterns are formed. While atonal music may sound random, its creation can't be. Randomly generated 12-tone rows often contain tonal patterns that spoil their atonal effect. Just for fun, I wrote a little computer program that generates random 12-tone rows. In the spirit of my youth, I will play these emphasizing their tonal elements. Let's generate one. The B major arpeggio at the beginning gives it a real sort of tonal feel. Let's try another one. This has a D-Dom-7 arpeggiation which goes to a G. And then after the G there's a B, which makes that sound like a G major chord. Let's do one more. This one sounds a little bit more atonal, except there's an F sharp which goes to a G close to the end, and that makes it sound like it's in the key of G. The point of all of this is that atonal music is the conscious negation of tonality. But why would anyone want to do that? I think the answer is that they were trying to create a certain kind of a sound, a certain style of music. Theodor Adorno summed up this style in his book, The Philosophy of Modern Music, when he wrote, "Modern music sees absolute oblivion as its goal. It is the surviving message of despair from the shipwrecked." That's a pretty bleak assessment. If you want to get a sense of what Adorno was talking about, take a look at some paintings. Atonal music was born out of German Expressionism, an artistic movement that encompassed all of the arts. Schoenberg was himself an expressionistic painter. He was friends with a number of prominent expressionists, and he was heavily influenced by their work. Take a look online, or better still, look at some paintings in person. I'm lucky enough to live near St. Louis, Missouri, which has an excellent art museum. This museum contains a collection of expressionistic paintings that's one of the best in the country. Many of these paintings are by Max Beckmann. One of Beckmann's early canvases is large, about 10 by 10 feet square, and it depicts the sinking of the Titanic. It's a brooding picture, dark, devoid of hope. It literally depicts a message of despair from the shipwrecked, just as Adorno suggested. My favorite painting in the collection is by Franz Marc. It's a painting of a couple of little goats. I must confess that I have a soft spot for animals. I grew up in the country around cows and horses and other kinds of wildlife, but somehow I was not desensitized to their charms. In spite of the basic dark pessimism of most expressionism, I find this painting kind of sweet. We are fortunate that these paintings still exist. In the middle part of the 20th century, the Nazi Party in Germany was rounding up paintings for destruction. They wished to cleanse the world of degenerate art, and expressionism fit strongly into that category. Much of the collection in the St. Louis Museum was hidden away or smuggled out of Germany. Otherwise, it might have ended up on a Nazi bonfire. This fiery end would have been appropriate for Expressionism. It would have been a crowning irony to have an art form based upon despair and pessimism destroyed in this way. But it breaks my heart to think of Franz Marc's tiny goats fed to the flames. No actual animals would have been harmed in the making of the bonfire, but still, I find the notion incredibly sad. But that's not what really happened. The painting is in the museum for us to enjoy today. The dystopian future where all expressionistic art was destroyed never took place. My teachers predicted that all music in the future would be atonal, but that message of despair failed to materialize. Or maybe it did, and we didn't notice, and we just moved on. So the dystopian future came and went, and hardly anybody noticed. What I'm trying to do in these videos is to get people to notice things about music, the one thing that I'm personally passionate about. I've tried to give you some concepts of what to notice in melody. These concepts do you no good unless you examine and notice things in individual works. The reason that I stopped writing atonal music was that I felt that it just couldn't express the variety of things that I wanted to express. Atonal music is great at expressing despair, not so good at expressing joy or happiness. It rarely has a kind of lighthearted charm. It rarely has humor, except maybe for sarcastic black comedy. Yet, Franz Marc's picture of little goats shows that individual works can transcend the limitations of style. We can learn more about music by discovering how individual works achieve their effects than we can by pigeonholing works according to rigid categories. Isn't it our interest in the traits of individual musical works that led us to the study of music to begin with? Isn't it our aesthetic enjoyment of individual works that keeps us coming back?